How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Zayin, Daf 37 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, Daf 37 is a pretty interesting Daf. The truth is Daf 38 is more interesting. Well, it's all about how interesting as you want it to be in some ways. Yeah, it depends how interesting you want to make it. I've been watching so many Shechita videos on YouTube. That's why I'm saying it's interesting. Yeah, finally it got to the point where I'm like, all right, I should really see what's going on here. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, but it was a bit of a rabbit hole. But yeah, I've watched lots of yeah, since I don't know what time this morning, maybe 2 a.m. I've watched a lot of videos of goats, mostly goats, sheep, and chickens being slaughtered. Pretty interesting stuff. But that I guess that's to say, that's what we're getting up to on this Mishnah. So today we are going to discuss an animal that is sick, that is on the threshold of life and death, and you slaughter that. So the main focus of today's daf is really going to be about, are you allowed to, is that even kosher? Are you allowed to eat that animal? That's really going to be the discussion of today. So today's discussion is really more of a technical discussion about is an animal that is super ill a kosher animal? Tomorrow, really, we're going to discuss the rest of the Mishnah, which I'll mention today because it's in today's Mishnah, which is about pirkus, which is about jerking around. When the animal jerks around after it's slaughtered, which is kind of that's kind of what led me to say, hey, I should really look at what this stuff looks like. Also, because I've been talking about the blood squirting out of the neck. I just wanted to see what does that really look like? Is it really squirting? What does that look like? It kind of more gushes, I'd say. It's a combination of gushing, squirting, and spurting, I would say. Pretty interesting stuff. But there was a lot more tomorrow. More tomorrow is kind of more of this hands-on stuff. But yeah, I'm happy I'd been kind of watching lots of YouTube videos of this stuff because I wanted to get a survey of different scenarios. If you just watch one goat being slaughtered by a sweet Pakistani woman in her chatzer, so that's just one example. And if you're wondering why I was watching videos of a Pakistani woman slaughtering a goat in her chatzer, it's just because that's what's available. There aren't that many shechita videos on that I found, but I did find a bunch of videos of this Pakistani woman in her yard slaughtering goats. So I watched a bunch of those videos. Just you see, because sometimes the blood squirts more, sometimes it spurts more, sometimes it gushes more, sometimes the goat goes sometimes it doesn't. In one of the videos I got to see the legs jerking and stuff like that. So you really do get, by watching a whole bunch of videos, you kind of get to see different things. Yeah, the chicken's flopping and flailing all over the place. So it's interesting stuff. And then I watched one shechita video because there weren't that many that I found. I watched a shechita video. That guy's a pro. That guy's a real pro. That guy's the shochtim. They Yidden they take the, because you didn't have halachas for everything. I don't know much about halal, but it seemed I think halal, you have to I guess, similar to shechita, you have to slice the neck open, I guess. But it didn't seem that she was geeking out like the shochtim do, She wasn't checking, the shochet, they really, you see them, those knives are super sharp. And you see the rabbis checking the knives and saying, no, this, you have to sharpen this part better, checking with their fingernail, every little bit of the knife, looking for the smallest imperfections and no, you got to go back and sharpen it more. And then they just do 2 slices and the whole neck just rips open and that animal is dead, any blood going to the brain is instantly drained out. I watched kind of the slaughter of a sheep I don't know what goes on in the factories. That's why I was hesitant, I think, to watch the videos because the factory stuff, it just seems like an absolute mess. But just watching a pro do a shechita on a sheep, that was actually, if you could say, it was pretty beautiful actually. That guy was a pro, a real pro. Now our Pakistani friend making a goat for her family. It's interesting. It's a different vibe. It's more like, like it's cool. It's cool that just like more of a vibe that like anybody can do it kind of thing. But like, it was more like home style. She used like a kitchen knife, not as sharp as like the shochet's knife. It took a few like, backs and forths to really get that neck open. But yeah, it was all like super interesting stuff. Anyways, it's not super related to it. It is related to what we're doing, but I guess it's just kind of on my mind. I've been watching a lot of these YouTube videos. If you're curious, I've seen a lot of interesting stuff. So if you're curious for some links, let me know. Okay, anyways, we should start learning the daf. Friends, we begin on Daf Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph, 3 lines into the page at the new Mishnah. Shoichet esa mesukenes. So, somebody who slaughters an animal that is very, very sick, like deathly sick, and it's like, let's quickly shecht it before it becomes an avela, that kind of sick. So now, the Mishnah says of Shimon Gamliel, there's other Girsahs that say Rabban Gamliel, and the truth is the Gemara on Daf Lamed Ches says Rabban Gamliel, so I'm going to go with Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel, says Rabban Gamliel, Ad she tifarkes biyad uva regel. So according to Rabban Gamliel, once the animal, the sick animal is slaughtered, you need to make sure that the animal jerks its arm as well as its leg. An arm and a leg. Rabbi Eliezer, Daya Zinka. Rabbi Eliezer says, don't worry about the arm and the leg jerking. Check for the blood pouring out. Yes, like after you kind of slice through like the neck, the blood just like pours out. And now I assume that is the vridim. I assume that's because they cut through the arteries. I don't know how much blood there is in the kana and the veshet, but they also I think just, again, the shrita knife, like the shochet, his knife is so sharp. It's just like, yeah, that guy, it was a real professional, that guy. Anyways, that knife just went right through everything, and it was blood, pouring out and squirting out and absolutely everything. Yeah. Anyways, so Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Daya im Zinka. So Rabbi Eliezer says, look, if when you slice open the neck, like blood is like pouring out, with like, a strong current. So that's enough to indicate that because what's the concern? The concern is that this is a deathly ill animal, right? So there is a question of, is this animal dead because you shechted it, or is this animal dead because it died just before you shechted it? So we're looking for indications that it was alive when you shechted it, and now that you sliced open its neck, it died because of that. So says Rabban Gamliel, if it's jerking its hand and its leg, then that is, that's because of what you did, because of what the shochet did. Says Rabbi Eliezer, if the blood is pouring out, it means that it's pouring out because just now, right, it was very much alive, and you sliced open its throat, and now all the blood is pouring out. I guess if it died just before that, it wouldn't be pouring out the same way. Right? Because what does Rashi say? Im zinka kederech shabemos nofchos begronam. So nofchos, I don't know. Is that like a matter of like breathing or like expanding or something? But I guess the point is, if it died beforehand, or how about this? If it's alive when you slice open the throat, so it's like breathing and stuff, and like all that, I guess the body's alive and kind of stuff is happening and moving, and then you just like all the blood goes flowing out. But if it's already dead, I guess it wouldn't have that same kind of intense flow, I guess. Reb Shimon says, somebody who slaughters at night, ulamacher hishkim umatzak salam leim dam, and then the next day he wakes up and finds that the walls are filled with blood. Kshera, it is kshera shezinka, because the blood flew out, poured out, and squirted out, and all that stuff. Ukmidas Rabbi Eliezer, like Rabbi Eliezer. So interesting. Okay. So what's interesting about this? We're going to see in the Gemara tomorrow that Shmuel says that these walls that we're talking about is not like the wall of your chatzer or something. It's the walls of the Beis Hashchita, of where the slice is, right? So basically, according to that, what Reb Shimon is saying is that if one slices open the neck of this animal, and it's at night and he can't see so good, but he comes back the next day and he sees that the Beit HaShchita, where he sliced through, is, filled with blood. There's blood, it's overflowing with, it's like very bloody the next morning. So you can see that, okay, clearly the blood flew out really strong. Interestingly, the shchita that I watched, I only saw one shchita because I didn't find like such a plethora of shchitas to watch. I watched a lot more of this Pakistani woman in her yard, but the shchita that I watched actually was in a chatzer, and the shochet pointed out that there was blood all over the walls of the chatzer, and he pointed to this Mishnah, which is interesting because this, as we're going to see also at the end, like this Mishnah is specific to, seems to, I don't know, maybe we'll like learn more about Pirkus that I don't know about yet. I don't know, but this Mishnah seems to be specifically about an animal that's really sick, and yet the shochet was like pointing out a few interesting things. He pointed out that the walls were all bloody, which is interesting because Shmuel says in the Mishnah, that in the Gemara, that it's actually talking about the Beit HaShchita, right? Actually, where the slit was. But also, interestingly, when the shochet, when he slaughtered the sheep, he tied up like three of the legs, meaning three, basically the two forearms, the two forelegs, and one of the back legs. He tied them all together, but he left one of the back legs untied so that he could see that it's kicking around, which is interesting because, again, that it seemed like a healthy sheep. Anyways, but okay, well let's go weiter. So it says Reb Shimon, if you slaughter at night and you can't, you can't see that good. So if the next morning the neck is all bloody, so then you could tell that the blood really poured out, like Rabbi Eliezer was saying. So whereas Rabbi Gamliel had said that the shchita is kosher if the animal jerks both its hand, one of its hands and one of its legs, the rabbis say either or. O biad, either an arm, o beregel, or a leg. O tikashkesh biznava, or that it wiggles its tail. Echad be'madaka v'echad be'magasa, and the requirement for jerking is, for pirkus, whether it's jerking of the hand and the arm and the leg, the arm or the leg gushing out of blood, however you define it, this pirkus for a sick animal is a requirement for whether it is a be'madaka, like a sheep or a goat, or be'magasa, or whether it is a big animal like a cow. Be'madaka she pashta yado v'lo echzira psula. Now, a behema daka, like a sheep or a goat, if after shechting the sheep or the goat, it extends its forearm, but doesn't bring it back, it's psula she'ena ela otzas nefesh bilvad, because that would only that's just indication of a normal death. Meaning, again, this is a sick animal, and the question is, did it die on its own or did it die from the shchita? So apparently an animal, if it becomes an avela, if it just kind of dies on its own, it will do that. It will just kind of extend, a behema daka, a goat, a sheep, it will extend its forearm. So if after the shchita just extends its forearm, that isn't an indication that it died because of the shchita. Because whenever it dies, it would do that. Now for a behema gasa, for like a cow, that would be enough. Now, what it has to do is it would extend it and bring it back. And Ataka saw this with the Pakistani woman. So in one of her videos, she kind of untied, she also tied up like the legs of the goat. She would like tie up the two front legs together and two back legs together and then tie them all together. And anyways, she untied it, and you could see, if you want the link to these videos, I could send them to you. Pretty interesting stuff if you want to stomach it. I'm a vegetarian. I don't even eat meat. Anyways, so yeah, she untied the legs, and you can see it like literally like almost like, here's my elbow, just like extending and closing and opening and closing. Like, yeah, it like extends its leg, it pulls it in, it extends it, it pulls it in. So like that's what it's, yeah, the legs are like totally like, yeah, extending and extending and crouching and opening and crouching. So anyways, so it needs to do that by a behema daka, like a goat. Now, all of this stuff that we're talking about is sha'isa b'chezkas misukenes. That's if it's b'chezkas misukenes. If the assumption is that this animal is in danger, it's deathly ill. But if the assumption is that this was a healthy animal, even if you have none of the aforementioned signs, it is nonetheless ksheira. You don't need to be checking for like pirkus and stuff like that. So which is interesting, right? Because as I pointed out, that the shaychit, when he was shechting that sheep, he was pointing out essentially all of the stuff in our Mishnah. He even got into Reb Shimon and shechting at night, which is interesting because it seemed like a healthy animal. But I don't know, could be that there's more to the story here. Maybe it's just a chumrah, who knows? And now for the rest of the daf, we're really going to be questioning whether in fact we can, how do we know that we can even be eating this animal that is so ill? So says the Gemara, Misukenes b'may deshaya. How do we know, why are we assuming that such an ill animal, such a sick animal, is in fact permitted to be shechted and eaten? So now the Gemara asks in the inverse, well, umimai tesuk adaitin de asira. Well, why are you assuming that it's asur, that we would need to bring it? Right? Why are we saying, how do we know it's mutter? Well, why are we assuming it's asur? I'll tell you why we're assuming it's asur. Dechsiv zos achaya asher tochlu. The pasuk says, this is the chaya that you can eat. What are you eating? A chaya. What's the root of chaya? Chai, alive. A animal that has vitality. Chaya echol, eat a animal that has vitality. V'she'ena chaya lo tochel. And if it does not have vitality, if it's deathly ill, don't eat it. So ve'al musukenes ena chaya, and this very, very ill animal is not an animal that is full of vitality. So the Gemara says, there you have it. Why am I, wait, how do we know that it's permitted? Right, so if you're asking me, well, why are we assuming that it's not permitted? I just told you why we're assuming that it's not permitted, because the animal should have vitality, and this doesn't have vitality. So the Gemara says, fine, okay, fair enough. I'll tell you how we know that a animal that is very ill is nonetheless kosher. Midamar Achmana, because the pasuk says nevela lo sochel. Because the pasuk says, what are you not allowed to eat? You're not allowed to eat nevela. Michlal, which implies the misukenes sharia, that misukenes is permitted. Now, friends, the Gemara is making an assumption for the next while. Until we say otherwise, the Gemara is making an assumption. That assumption is that a nevela. What's a nevela? A nevela is an animal that. So this is the assumption for now is what's a nevela. A nevela is an animal that drops dead. A sheep that drops dead, for example. Now, if we're talking about a sheep that drops dead, why did the sheep drop dead? Sheep have to drop dead for a reason. It must be because it was deathly ill. I.e., essentially you could think of a misukenes. We're going to be saying the word misukenes a lot on this stuff. Misukenes is our animal that's deathly ill. The assumption that you can think of a misukenes as a not yet nevela, right? As a not yet nevela, as a soon to be nevela, i.e., there is a trajectory from being a misukenes, from being deathly ill, to then becoming a nevela. And any nevela was, while it was still alive, a misukenes. So there is sort of this trajectory of a misukenes essentially being a nevela that's still alive, and then when it dies, it kind of transitions into being a nevela. But it has this kind of trajectory. So now, again, so it says the Gemara, I'm reading that again, nevela lo sochel, from the fact that the Torah says don't eat. Essentially, you could say this misukenes once it is a nevela. So from the fact that the Torah says don't eat it when it's a nevela, Michlal, that implies the misukenes sharia, that when it is a misukenes, it is permitted. Disagadaitich misukenes asira, because if it enters your mind that while it is not yet a nevela, while it is still a misukenes, while it is still alive, already asira, it is forbidden to be eaten. Well, hashta mechayim asira. Well, if that's the case, while it is still a misukenis, it's already usr. Well, then la'achar misa mibai. Certainly, then after it's dead, when it becomes a nevela, certainly it's usr. Why would it become mutter? It was already usr when it was alive, when it was a misukenis. Now it died and became a nevela. Absolutely nothing happened that would all of a sudden make it mutter. So of course it continues to be usr. So says the Gemara, the reason why a misukenis, the argument to say that a misukenis is mutter, is because the Torah specifically says don't eat nevela. And for the fact that the Torah needs to say don't eat nevela means that up until then, when it was a misukenis, it was permitted, and now that it's a nevela, don't eat it. V'dilma hainu nevela hainu misukenis. Now the Gemara says, well, maybe, let's say that essentially the misukenis and the nevela are the same. That when we're talking about a misukenis, that you can already refer to a misukenis as a nevela. You can already refer to a misukenis as a nevela. That when this animal is deathly ill, you can already refer to it as nevela. What's it? So therefore, when the Torah says don't eat a nevela, that could already be applied to a misukenis. And what does that mean? It means that, well, we had initially quoted a pasuk, Zos achaya asher tochlu, right? That was the pasuk. Eat chayas, eat animals that are full of vitality. That's a mitzvah's essay. So I can make the argument that, well, maybe you're not allowed to eat misukenises. And if you do eat a misukenis, you're in violation of the mitzvah's essay of Zos achaya asher tochlu, eat a chaya. But by saying that a misukenis could also be considered a nevela, so then you're also then not just in violation of the mitzvah's essay of Zos achaya asher tochlu, but you're also, by eating a misukenis, in violation of the lo taseh of lo sochlu ko nevela, of don't eat nevela. So maybe misukenis is usher to eat, and a misukenis is actually also referred to as a nevela, and that if you eat a misukenis, you are in violation of both Zos achaya asher tochlu as well as lo sochlu kol nevela. Lo sal kadaitech, no way, no how. Tichsib, because the pasuk says v'chiyamus min habehema asher ilachim laochlo. When an animal that you're allowed to eat, like a sheep or a goat or a cow, dies and now it's dead, hanogeh b'nivlasa, then this Torah refers to it as a nevela. Le'achar misa hu dekari rachmana nevela. That no, it's only a nevela after it's dead. Michaim le'ikri nevela. It's not a nevela when it's still alive. So no, so don't suggest to me that maybe actually the misukenis is usher, and in terms of the nevela, it's referring to also the misukenis. Right, the misukenis is also a nevela, and you're over on an essay and a lotase. No, because the pasuk says, that specifically says v'chiyamus min habehema etc. hanogea b'nivlasa. Only at that point it's called nevela after it's dead. But for the Gemara, wait, but maybe the whole distinction about dead and alive, v'dilma la'olam emalach hainu nevela hainu misukenis. Maybe I will argue that no, you can say that you can already refer to the misukenis as a nevela, and the difference is, the thing about being after death is that mechayim be'esei lachar misa belav, that when the misukenis, right, when it's still alive, when it's a misukenis, so then you're only in violation of the essay of Zos achaya asher tochlu. And when the misukenis then dies and becomes an nevela, then you are in violation of lo sochlu kon nevela. That you only become in violation of lo sochlu kon nevela after it dies. But maybe you could say that a misukenes is already aser, i.e. when the nevela is still alive and it's misukenes, it's aser. And the pasuk about right, and therefore, and it could already be referred to as a nevela, and you're not allowed to eat it. And when the pasuk talks about that a nevela is dafka after death, that is specifically in terms of being over on the lav, right? So we had asked earlier, if a misukenis is already also when it's alive, right? When it's alive, it's a misukenis, it's also. So why do I need a pasuk about nevela? The answer is you need a pasuk about nevela because it's only after death that you're going to be over on the lav of lo sochlu kon nevela. Okay, fine. So we got in a bit of a quagmire, right? We're trying to figure out how we know that a misukenis this animal that's deathly ill is nonetheless mutter to shecht and to eat. And we tried making inferences from nevela, and we kind of got caught up in a quagmire, and for this and for that, maybe misukenes and nevela are the same thing. We got a bit caught up, so we got a little stuck, and we were unable to prove that a misukenes is kosher from nevela. So ela mida amar achmana treifa lo sochel. So now the Gemara tries to do a similar mahalach, but this time with treifas. The Torah says don't eat treifas. Michlal, the mesukenes shaya, implying that mesukenes is permitted. Now, what's the difference between a treifa and a mesukenes? So we want to say that the difference is a treifa is when it has like a physical defect. For example, like a puncture in the membrane of its brain, in the kruma moach, or if like the back leg is like missing, and I assume the point is like missing and probably blood's like gushing out or something, right? There's like a physical defect, something happened to the animal physically that made it into a treifa. As opposed to misukenes, it's deathly ill. Nothing physically happened to its body. It's very ill. So now, so again, from the fact that the puzzle says don't eat a treifa, that implies that a misukenes, that when it's sick, it is permitted, because the isakadaitich misukenes asira, because if it enters your mind to say that a misukenes is already asur, well then, hashta misukenes delo mechsira asira, if a misukenes that there's no physical, nothing happened to it physically, it's not like missing a leg or anything like that, and if we said the misukenes is already asur, so treifa mibaya, obviously then a treifa where it actually has like physical deficiencies, like a missing a leg, certainly that is going to be asur. So from the fact that the Torah has to say that a treifa is asur, it implies that misukenes is mutter. V'dilma ainu treifa ainu misukenes. No, 1 second. As Rashi says, the treifa lashon misukenesi. A treifa is a lashon of misukenes, that they're both types of misukeneses. A treifa is a misukenes where it's like missing a leg potentially, and a misukenes is a misukenes where it isn't missing a leg or having a hole in the membrane of the brain, but it is deathly ill. But they're both different types of treifas. V'laver olav be'esei v'lo saisei. And when the and when you have this pasuk of treifa low, right, don't eat treifas, it's to say that you'll be over on an essay and a low tasei. Okay, so maybe both misukeneses and treifas are types of treifas, and that you will be, both are asur, and you're in violation of the essay of zos achaya asher tochlu, as well as not to eat any treifa. As the pasuk says, "Uvasar basada treifa lo sochelu." Okay. But im kain nevela the cause of achman alamali. Well, if that is the case, right? So if that is the case, that a misukenes is like a treifa, if that's the case, that a misukenes is like a treifa, and it's also when it is alive, and right, and it's also when it is alive, and you're going to be over on a lav, right? So if we're saying that a misukenes is like a treifa, and it's also when it's right, even when the misukenes is still alive, it's then slaughtered, right? And we're saying that it's asur, just like a treifa is asur, and you're going to be over on a lav, just like by a treifa you're over on a lav. Well, if that's the case, then why do I need b'chlal a pasuk by nevela? Because as we said, a misukenes is just a nevela that's still alive. Now, if we're saying that while this misukenes, right, is still alive, it's already asur, just like a treifa is asur, and if you slaughter and eat it, you will be in violation of an essay and a lo taseh. Why do I need bichlal the lo taseh of nevela anymore? If when it's still alive, you're already over on a lav if you shecht it and eat it, certainly you're still going to be over on that lav if it dies and becomes a nevela. So why do I bichlal need anymore a pasuk for nevela? Nevela the cause of achman alamali. Why do I need the pasuk by nevela? If already when the nevela is still alive, when it's a misukenes, if you shecht it and eat it, you will be in violation of an essay and a lo ta'aseh. Of course, now that it's dead and it's a nevela, if you eat it, you will be in violation of an essay and a lo taseh. V'dilma, hainu nevela, hainu treifa, hainu mesukenes. Well, maybe they're basically all three. That essentially, if you eat a nevela, you're going to be over on 3 lavs. If you eat a nevela, you'll be over on 3 lavs. Because as we said, when the nevela was still alive and it was a mesukenes, if you shechted it and ate it, you would be in violation of, you have to eat chayas, don't eat treifas. And now that it's dead, we also add a third element, don't eat nevela. So maybe that's the point. So maybe mesukenes is osir, and you'll be, when it's still alive, if you shecht and eat it, you'll be in violation of, you have to eat the essay of you have to eat chayas. You'll also be in violation of the lo taseh of don't eat treifa. And if it dies, then you'll additionally be in violation of don't eat nevela. Right? So v'dilma ainu nevela, ainu treifa, ainu mesukenes, v'lavar all of b'shnei lavin ve'essay, and that if you eat a nevela, you'll be over on 2 lavs, don't eat nevela, don't eat treifa, as well as the essay of eat animals that have vitality. Rather, so again, so we keep on getting stuck up. We're here trying to demonstrate that a mesukenes can be slaughtered and eaten and enjoyed, and it's kosher, and yet we keep on getting stuck in this place where we say, well, maybe it's actually in fact asur. So rather, let's learn out that mesukenes is permitted from here. V'chelev nevela, v'chelev treifa, ye'aseh l'cha malacha v'achal lo sochlu. Now, I want to point out that there's a different pasuk that says kol chelev v'chodam lo sochelu. That there's already a pasuk that says don't eat any chelev. Now we have another pasuk that specifies in the context of nevela and treifa. Again, the pasuk says the chelev nevela b'chelev treifa. When it comes to the chelev of nevela and the chelev of treifa, ye'aseh l'cha malacha. You can do any malacha with it. This is particularly necessary for nevela, because nevela is, of course, an avatuma. What the Torah is saying, ye'aseh l'cha malacha, is that when it comes to the chelev, you can do malacha with the chelev and you won't be tameh. So even though the nevela is tameh, its chelev is not tameh. V'achal lo sochlu, and don't eat the chelev of a nevela and don't eat the chelev of a treifa. So why did we need to say don't eat the chelev of a nevela, don't eat the chelev of a treifa? We already have a pasuk that says don't eat chelev. So Amar Torah, the pasuk says yavo iser nevela v'yachol al iser chelev, yavo iser treifa v'yachol al iser chelev. Says the Torah, the reason why we are reiterating in the context of nevela and in the context of treifa, don't eat chelev, it's to say that if you do eat the chelev of a nevela or of a treifa, not only will you be in the violation of don't eat chelev, you will also be in violation of don't eat nevela and don't eat treifa. That's why it is reiterated. Now, treifa hainu misukenes. Now, if it enters your mind that a treifa and a mesukenes are the same thing, lichtov rachmana, well then the pasuk should say the following. Let's reiterate. What does the pasuk say? The pasuk says, v'chelev nevela, v'chelev treifa, ye'aseh l'cha malacha, v'achal lo sochlu. That at the beginning of the pasuk mentions v'chelev nevela, v'chelev treifa. At the beginning of the pasuk, it mentions nevela and it mentions treifa, and it says you can do whatever work you want with it, don't eat it. However, the Gemara says if misukenes and treifa are essentially treated the same way, so then, if that's the case, so then the pasuk should really be structured differently. Lichtov Rachmana, what the pasuk should write, it should be structured in the following way: Chelev nevela ye'aseh l'cha malacha. That in terms of chelev of nevela, you could do whatever malacha you want with it, because that's the chiddush, right? That nevela is generally an avatuma. But if you touch the chelev of the nevela, you won't be tamei. So you don't have to say v'chelev nevela v'chelev treifa. For the first part of the puzzle, just say v'chelev nevela ya'asa l'chol melacha. That when it comes to nevela, which is usually an avatuma, in terms of its chelev, you could do whatever melacha you want with it. You won't be tamei. Now v'chelev treifa lo sochelu, and don't eat the chelev of a treifa. Now, if we say that treifa also includes a misukenes, don't eat the chelev of misukenes, then I'll say, well, a misukenes is just a not yet dead nevela. And if a treifa and a misukenes are essentially the same, they're both types of treifas, so then when the pasuk says don't eat treifa, and if you do, you'll be in violation of 2 lavs, that also applies to misukenes. And if this already applies to misukenes when it's alive, so obviously it's also going to apply when it's dead and it's a nevela. So just structure, currently the pasuk is structured that nevela and treifa are both listed at the beginning of the pasuk. But if we say that treifa and misukenes are the same, structure the pasuk in the following way. Say, nevela ye'asa l'chol melacha, that by nevela, if you touch the chelev, you will be tahor. And in terms of treifa, don't eat it. And that applies also to misukenes, which memela then also applies to nevela. And I'll say, umamechayim osi isur treifa v'chayil isur chelev, that if when the nevela is still alive and it's a misukenes, there, right, osi isur treifa v'chayil isur chelev, that the isur of treifa, right, when it's a misukenes and it's alive and it's a type of treifa, if you slaughter it and eat its chelev, so you'll be in violation of don't eat chelev, but also don't eat treifa. La'achar misa mibaya, certainly when it's then dies, of course, then you will also be in violation of don't eat chelev, but also don't eat nevela, right? If you were chayiv for 2 lavs when it was alive, certainly when it's dead, you'll also still be chayiv for 2 lavs. El midikasav achmana nevela, rather, and therefore says the Gemara, from the fact that the pasuk does say nevela utre, right? Chelev v'chelev nevela v'chelev treifa. The fact that the pasuk does point out that also don't eat the nevela and not just don't eat the treifa means that misukenes is not included in treifa, and that a misukenes is permitted to be eaten. Nevela michlal de treifa, right? Because of Rahman nevela michlal de treifa lab ainu misukenes. Therefore, it must be that a treifa is not a misukenes, and a misukenes is allowed to be eaten, and that is why the pasuk had to point out, don't eat the chelev of nevela, and if you do, you will be in violation of 2 lavs. Okay, so where we stand now, misukenes is allowed to be eaten. Maskif la Ma'aber of Ashi, but Ma'aber of Ashi asks the following query. Maybe I will suggest, no, treifa and misukenes are in fact the same. And just like by a treifa you will be in violation for 2 lavs, so also for the misukenes. Nevela, because of Achmana Lomali, and then you said, okay, but if that's the case, that misukenes and treifa are the same, and you're over on 2 lavs if you eat the chelev of a misukenes, so why do I need to say anything about nevela? Lehach nevela delo asya mikoach misukenes. Now, for the first time, the Gemara acknowledges that maybe a nevela is not just a dead misukenes. Maybe there are other ways to become a nevela. For example, if you used a French guillotine, right? A nevela is basically any animal that would, either any non-kosher animal, but any kosher animal that was not slaughtered correctly is a nevela. So there are other ways for an animal to be a nevela than just to be deathly ill. For example, if an animal its head is entirely chopped off with a French guillotine, so then it would be a nevela, even though it was never a misukenes. So maybe that's why, even though maybe you could say that misukenes is a type of treifa, and if you shecht and eat a misukenes and eat its chelev, you will be over on don't eat chelev and don't eat treifas. But we still have to teach that if you eat the chelev of a nevela, you will be in violation of don't eat chelev and don't eat nevela, because, for example, if an animal was killed with a French guillotine rather than kosher shchita. Hasam nami. So now the Gemara gives 3 answers, and with this we will wrap up today's daf. Answer number 1. Hasam nami I efsher delo hava misukenes porta mikame de lipasek liruba. Answer number 1 for why that is not a good suggestion, meaning we wanted to say that there are other types of nevelas that aren't misukenes. Answer number 1 is that no, it's not true. There are not other types of nevelas that are not misukenes. What about the French guillotine? What about an animal that its head was chopped off? It was never misukenes. It was perfectly healthy, and then its head was chopped off. Technically speaking, it's all happening instantly, but technically speaking, in the instant, in the fraction of a second, that the blade of the French guillotine was going through the neck of the animal, and it wasn't yet a rove of the way, but it was like definitely cutting through the neck. It was in bad shape. It was misukenes. It was deathly ill. Once that blade kind of was like halfway through, but not more than halfway through, in that like fraction of an instant, it was a misukenes, and then the blade went, a robe of the way through, and it was dead. But there was a split instant when it was, in fact, a misukenes before it became a nevela. That is answer number 1, and therefore, so if you're going to say, well, let's say that misukenes is in fact the same as a treifa, and we still need nevela because not every nevela was first a misukenes, we'll argue, yes, every nevela is first a misukenes, even when killed by a French guillotine. V'i ba'isema, I'll give you a second reason why we won't say that a misukenes is a treifa. V'i ba'isema imkain lema chelev nevela v'treifa chelev lomali. If you notice, the pasuk says v'chelev nevela v'chelev treifa ye'asa l'chol malacha. It says chelev twice. Can it just say v'chelev nevela utreifa? Just say the chelev of a nevela and a treifa. You can do malacha with it. Don't eat it. Why does that say chelev twice? Zo'i she'ein chelba cholak b'basar. The answer is it says chelev twice to say that it is in this scenario where the chelev and the meat are both treated similarly, i.e. that they are asur. V'yesh l'cha acheres, but there is a different scenario, shechel b'choluk mibasara, that even though its chelev is asur, its meat is mutter. Ve'ezo zo misukenes. And what is that in misukenes? Meaning, the fact that it says v'chelev nevela, v'chelev treifa, it's saying that there's something unique about nevela and treifa, in that their chelev is asur and their meat is asur. And we want to say that that is to the exclusion of a different similar scenario, but where even though the chelev is asur, its meat is mutter, and that is a misukenes. Okay, so therefore a misukenes is going to be mutter to eat, v'bais ema. And finally, me'acha, from the following pasuk is a pasuk in Yechezkel. That this is a pasuk in Yechezkel. There's a very interesting prophecy in the 4th chapter of Ezekiel. In the 4th chapter of Ezekiel, the Rabbeinu Shalom says to Ezekiel, take a brick, and on that brick, I want you to etch an etching of Jerusalem, of Yerushalayim. And then I want you to take some Legos, And around this brick upon which is etched the city of Jerusalem, I want you to take Legos and build ramparts and I don't know what those are, but besiege the brick city of Jerusalem and bring battering rams and make a scene of a whole siege of Jerusalem. And then what I want you to do is I want you to lean on your left arm for 390 days to atone for the sins of Israel. 390 days. That's more than a year. I want you to lean on your left arm next to this scene. And then after those 13 months or so, I want you to lean on your right arm for another 40 days, for another roughly month and a half. Leaning on your right arm to atone for the sins of Judah. And after that, I want you to make bread and bake it in human excrement. And Ezekiel is like, wait. I think you went a little too far over there. Making the brick and the Legos and the whole scene, leaning on my left arm for over a year and my right arm for over a month. I'm cool with that. The human excrement thing, I can't do that. And he says in the pasuk, Va'omar, and I says, Aho Hashem, please God, Elokim, hine nafshi lo mituma'a, my soul has never been impure. V'nevela v'treifa lo achalti, I never even ate nevela and treifa minuri v'ad ato, from minuri v'ad ato, from when I was a young boy until now. V'lo ba b'fi b'sar pigel, I never ate any pigel. There's no way, I can't eat the human excrement thing. Says the Gemara, hine nafshi lo mituma'a shelo yaharti bayom lovely de tuma balayla. I never had improper thoughts, says Ezekiel, that would lead me to have a nocturnal emission. V'nevela v'treifa lo achalti minu'urai shelo achalti besar kos me olam. I never ate any meat that they said quickly shecht it before it dies, i.e. the scenario that we're talking about, a misukenes. I never ate any meat where it was shechted in a hurry to prevent it from imminent death. V'lo ba b'fi b'sar pigel shelo achalti mibehema shehora ba chacham. And I never ate from an animal that there was any kind of suffix about it, that it had to be brought to a chacham to get an opinion about it. If there was a question about whether it was a kosher animal, I stayed away from it. They said in the name of Rab Nosson, that I never ate from an animal where the matnos kahuna that we're gonna learn. There's a parak in Masechta Chullin called Azroa v'alachayim ba'akeva. The forearm and the jaws and the stomach, those are the matnos kahuna. Those are given to the kohen. He says, I never ate from an animal that the matnos kahuna were not separate. Tosfos points out that Yechezkel was actually a kohen, but even so, still, even kohanim nonetheless need to separate these things. And he says that I never ate from an animal where they were not separated. So now says the Gemara, I amrat bishlama sharya. So I understand if you say that in principle you're allowed to eat from a misukenes, from a deathly ill animal. Hani rabusa di Yechezkel. That's what Yechezkel was saying, right? Yechezkel was saying, look, I've never, even kadesh atzmacha b'mutarlach, right? Even things that are technically kosher, but maybe are b'di'evid, like a deathly ill animal, which is technically mutter to me. I stayed away from it, even though I could have had it. I stayed away from it. Eli amrat asira my rabusa di Yechezkel. But if you say that eating these deathly ill animals are usser, well then what's the chiddush of Yechezkel? I never ate usser meat. Okay, you're not supposed to be eating usser meat, but rather the fact that Yechezkel pointed out, look, I haven't even eaten this meat from an animal that was ill, that was deathly ill means that it technically is kosher, and Yechezkel was pointing out that he nonetheless took upon himself to refrain from eating that meat. So therefore, for these reasons, we ultimately resolve and land that we kind of say in the end that a mesukenes is at least technically mutter to be eaten. That was Daf Lamed Zayin, that 37 of Masechta Chulin, and Daf 37. We learned a Mishnah that discusses an animal that is deathly ill and all of the precautions that we need to make during its shechita to make sure that it died because of our shechita and not because of its illness. We will really get into those details more tomorrow. The focus of today's daf was really, how do we bichlal know that a misukenes, a deathly ill animal, is actually kosher and allowed to be eaten? There was a lot of back and forth with nevela and with treifa and using logic and our noggins and stuff. In the end, we were able to find 3 reasons to resolve that a misukenes is in fact kosher to be eaten. That was Daf Lamed Zayin of Masechta Chulin. I'll catch you all tomorrow. Cheers.